Welcome back, everybody. Nikki Young here with my fabulous co-host, Alyssa Nahara. Thanks for joining us again. We are excited to have you back, getting rolling in the new year. I know we've released episodes already, but we are officially back, I would say in studio, but I guess we're not really. We're back in our offices with mics in front of our faces.
We're back in the home studio. We're back in the home studio. We were so excited to be in the studio for you guys. We got like 2 recordings in and then we had to go back to our home studios. So here we are. Eventually we will have some cool recordings for you that take place in our studio. That will be fun. And today we're going to talk to you guys about toxic relationships. Now, for Nikki and I, this topic is familiar to us because last year, at the end of the year, we did some recordings without our producer and our director because we're like, it's cool, guys. Like, you guys have conflicting things. We'll take care of it. We got it. One of the 2 episodes we recorded got released because this topic that we recorded, somehow I lost.
And we were so incredibly proud of ourselves for recording without their oversight, right? Like we thought we nailed it, but there's this minor detail of recording what you're speaking.
Yeah.
Just small detail.
So here we are again, and we should be pros at this topic because we recorded this episode already. So if you've ever been that person that accidentally lost something really important, Nikki had to remind me and Stacy had to remind me it's going to be okay. Anthony on the other hand was like, are you sure you recorded it? Did you look? I just spent 6 hours trying to find the file. Yes, I looked. I called IT. I had to look. I can't find the file. So sometimes the stuff just happens and it sucks. And look at that. We're still okay. We're moving forward. So here we go with toxic relationships.
Welcome to the Therapists Uncut Podcast, where off-the-clock therapists who happen to be friends share their uncensored thoughts about real life. Join us weekly in spreading positivity and making mental health relatable through casual conversation, inspirational stories, and real talk with friends who happen to be therapists. Please welcome your co-hosts, Nikki Young and Alyssa Nahara.
I think I want to start by having everybody that's listening pause for a second and kind of think about what comes to mind when you hear the phrase toxic relationships. Pause for dramatic effect. Okay. So I think that toxic relationships is an accurate description. I think also sometimes in society, it takes on this negative connotation. Like for me, you can tell me if this is just me. I hate the word drama, right? I'm using air quotes right now. I hate it. I refuse to use it. In my experience, you use the word, you're part of it. Like, I just don't like it, right? And to me, the term toxic relationships kind of has similar associations. And I've heard that from others, right? So you can also think of it as unhealthy relationships, right? Relationships that are not benefiting you or that are harmful, unhealthy, toxic. That's my little caveat for the episode.
All of the words that you just said fell on a spectrum of super healthy, healthy, unhealthy, and then on the other end of the spectrum is, for me, would be toxic. And
because it's a spectrum. Just like everything in life, it is a total, complete spectrum. Nothing, well, this is highly ironic that I'm the one that's saying this, and my wife who's listening is going to laugh, but not everything's black and white. Nothing is black and white. For Nikki. Nikki tries to make everything black and white, but it's really not. And Alyssa, nail on the head, right? You're going to have a range of healthy to unhealthy relationships, which also means that there's going to be a range of responses to those. All right. It's not cookie cutter. It's either a healthy or unhealthy. If it's healthy, I do this. If it's unhealthy or toxic, I do this. All right. There's a lot of different things that we can do to address the variety relationships.
The variety. It sounds like a show. I just want to say thank you, Nikki, for helping me pick up. So I don't know if you guys can notice, if this is your first time tuning in, I don't normally sound like this, probably a little nasally today because like the rest of the world, I am sick. I'm healthy. I mean, like I'm good. It's manageable, but I am sick today and I apologize. So thank you, Nikki. It's funny that you say there's a variety because in my head, I'm like, oh, toxic relationships. When you're in one, are not always easy to recognize, or when you start noticing the red flags or you start noticing signs or things don't feel right, it could be easy to kind of push them away, give them grace, to maybe justify some of the behaviors or some of the things that didn't go well. But when you're the outside observer looking in, it's almost easier for the outside observer to say, what are you still doing with that? Like, why are you still friends with them? Why are you still in that relationship? Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something that we want to talk more about because we want to help you guys recognize potential signs of toxic relationships. Now, initially I was like, we got to tell our listeners how to avoid these. And then I had to kind of come back, talk with our director, Nikki, and we're like, well, sometimes it's not necessarily about avoiding them, because sometimes, first of all, it might not be safe to do that. But second of all, it's about managing them and navigating them and choosing what you're going to do in this kind of relationship, whether it's at work, whether it's with your peers, or whether it's with your partner, spouse, or parent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that speaks to the variety in a different manner, right? These are not just romantic relationships. These are not just friendships. These are not just colleague relationships. These are not just it's any relationship can be healthy or not healthy. And like you're saying, I think because of the nature of what some of these if it's a toxic coworker, you just started a new job, it might be a little bit easier to identify, right? They're new, you're new to the scene, they're new into your circle or your experience. You can maybe more easily identify those red flags. Excuse me. But if it is a family member, somebody you've known all the years of your life, somebody that's just always been there, it can be harder to differentiate. If it's a friend you've had for decades or whatnot, right? You might have grown accustomed to some of these red flags, or they might have come on very slowly. It may not have been an abrupt, all of a sudden something about this relationship changed. It could have, there's so many different reasons that make it much more difficult to identify a toxic relationship when you are the one in the relationship.
And often we develop this personal sense of obligation to the other person as though, well, I have to be in this relationship. And we may not use those words, but I have to go to this Christmas dinner. The last episode at the end of season 2 was about, at the end of season 1 was about surviving the holidays, because season 2, we were talking about getting shifty during the holidays. But at the end of season 1, surviving the holidays in the sense of, holidays can be great, they can be stressful, but at the same time, one of the major stressors, especially that we see in our therapy offices, is having to manage and navigate interactions with family or friends who maybe you've gotten away with not being around during the year, but here we are in the holidays, and now I have to be around uncle, aunt, cousin, so-and-so. Mm-hmm. So being able to recognize how you are going to choose to manage these. And let's talk a little bit about the signs. What might be signs of a unhealthy relationship that's bordering toxic? What can people look for?
I'm pausing for dramatic effect again, because I want our listeners to think about it, right? And not just hear our thoughts, because I'm going to guess that most people who heard you ask that kind of started rolling through their mental list of things that they would identify as toxic.
And then had people's pictures popping up in their head.
Yeah, totally.
Like, I forgot about this person. Good thing I ended that 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So what are some signs of toxic relationships? Again, there are a million and one, and something that could be toxic in one relationship may not, right? This isn't a cookie cutter. If this behavior occurs, this is always toxic, right? I think a lot of times we have to look at intentions, right? And once again, awareness, right? Communication. Are we communicating with these people about it? What's, nobody's perfect, right? So somebody in a relationship, whatever variety, can do something that is very unhealthy to or for you. And if you're able to safely and comfortably address it with that person, and then you work through it and they address that particular behavior and you move on, cool. That doesn't sound like a toxic relationship to me, right? But if it's unsafe, unhealthy to address it, or unsafe, if you're not able to, if they don't care, if they blow through it, if they tell you they are, they aren't, right? Those are some signs. But toxic relationship, red flag. What are some signs of a toxic relationship? I think part of it is how you feel in relation to the person. So not just what they are doing or not doing, but how do you feel?
Ooh, talk more about that one, because that actually was not on my list of things to go through. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if we reflect a little bit more on that, it's not always easy to identify, right, in somebody that we're maybe very close to or somebody that's been in our life a lot. How do you feel around that person? Do you feel like they build you up? Do you feel more confident? Do you feel heard? Do you feel understood? Do you feel joyous, or do you feel, and not that you have to be joyous in the relationship, right? But, or do you feel, it was a very strange
overall positive feelings. That's what I'm gathering.
Or do you feel less than? Do you feel stupid? Do you feel unsure? Do you feel controlled? Do you feel watched? Do you feel, I mean, I could go on and on and on, right?
It. Yeah, I like it. Do you feel on edge or paranoid or like you're walking on eggshells or like you're an inconvenience to that person? That can come up too, feeling as though when I assert myself or when I give my opinion or input, like I'm the inconvenience, or almost like it's a one-way street. All relationships are a two-way street. Mm-hmm. You got to give, you got to get, right? But if you're constantly feeling like you're the one that's always giving or jumping in to save or being the superhero because they're calling you at 3 a.m. because yet again, they're intoxicated under some substance and they can't get home. So here I am, I'm going to fly in and for the 5th time this month, picking you up and taking you home. Mm-hmm. There's potential for, especially if, I would say if you're an innate caregiver, if you are an innate empath and you want to help, sometimes we can overstep that and fall into these one-way street relationships where we're constantly giving, and we're not getting anything in return emotionally in this relationship.
I think that's a big one, talking to all the helpers out there, right? Whether it be therapists, nurses, anybody in a helping profession. I think that is something that we constantly have to check on ourselves because we are helpers, caregivers, and we can so easily stay in that role outside of the office, right? And oftentimes it's totally manageable and doable, and you're in an equally beneficial relationship where you're not just the one helping, you're also the one receiving the support and help. But things to watch out for is it reciprocal?
Yes. And I want to go into romantic relationships now. If you have ever described or are currently in a relationship where you have used the words, and I think of who's G-Eazy's ex-girlfriend? Halsey, I think.
I don't even know who G-Eazy is.
Halsey. God, I feel so old. Seriously, he's a pretty dope rapper. I'll say that. But I think they have a song together that's called like That Crazy Kind of Love or something. And in my head, I'm like, don't ever describe your relationship as a crazy kind of love. Help me understand because let me try this. Help me understand how you came to that descriptor of your relationship. Because in my experience, when you are using things like we have that crazy kind of love, and now I'm using air quotes, I'm worried about, well, what does that mean? How often do y'all break up? How often are you arguing? How are you arguing? Are you doing it in front of the kids like that? I have so many questions around that crazy kind of love.
And because I think a lot of the material that our generation and kids are exposed to in the media and such describes, if you don't have this all-consuming, desperate, fiery passion that one minute you're jealous and the next minute that you are just like, I can't even find the words, and I'm using like my hands to try to describe it, but essentially what Alyssa was just describing, that's oftentimes going to be a sign of some potential toxicity, right? The back and forth, the swings, again, I'm struggling to find the words to describe this.
I can almost visualize these conversations.
Exactly.
But it is difficult to put into words. And it's not that there's no coming back from toxicity. It really does take awareness, accountability, and effort, and overall safety. We keep talking about safety because toxicity is likely something that is present in abusive relationships. Mm-hmm. And today is not about abusive relationships because that is its own several episodes in itself. Because there's a lot of different components to that. But we want you to be safe if you choose to utilize any of the skills that we give you today. We want you to be safe in feeling that you can stand up for yourself or communicate what didn't work for you and what you need. I would never encourage you to do that in a place or a relationship where you felt unsafe. And just because we mentioned it today, we'll make sure we put a couple of resources around abusive relationships and domestic violence. What's it called now? Interpersonal violence? Mm-hmm. Okay. I got to keep up with the lingo. We will put that in the show notes for today's episode in case anybody needs those resources.
And
just I don't even know where I was going with that. Continue, Nikki.
No, totally. And just like we've talked about how there's a range of toxicity in relationships, there's also a range, and we'll get there, a range of responses, right? And we kind of touched on that. But in some relationships, if there's a flavor of toxicity, it can be worked through, right? Both people have to be willing to do so, but can be addressed. And you can kind of come, like you said, you can come back from that. There are going to be relationships where the toxicity is so severe or the intention behind it is violence, and those may not be safe to address in that way, right? So we just want to clarify that every situation is so incredibly personalized. And if you feel like you are potentially unsafe, like, please, let's get you some support in that so that you can figure out a safe way to address that for yourself. If we pull it back from maybe that extreme, what are some other signs?
I'm going to move to the workplace now.
Okay.
And again, maybe we should do an episode on this. I know we did shitty bosses in the past. So if you've ever experienced a shitty boss, please go back and listen to that episode. It was probably one of our most top played episodes within that season. But if we're talking about toxicity at work, there are 3 words that kind of come to mind that people whom I have either worked with professionally or talked to on a personal basis use to describe toxic environments. Punitive. Oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
That sucks, right? When you guys hear that and you're like, ooh, I don't ever want to be in a punitive, oppressive environment. And toxic. That's the third one. A toxic work environment. So if you are in a work environment where you are avoiding coming to work because something doesn't feel right when you walk through that door, maybe you're avoiding peers or avoiding supervisors or upper management because of the way that they speak to you. Maybe how they're speaking to you feels really demeaning. Maybe, I hope nobody is name calling in a leadership position or at work, but that happens sometimes, right?
It does.
So feeling as though you're almost trapped in this toxic work environment can happen. So how might somebody manage toxicity at work?
Dramatic pause. That's my thing today. Again, it depends, right? Because is this a peer, a colleague? Is this somebody in leadership above you? Is this somebody that you can have those open relationships conversations with? Can you address it? Is there a safe way to do that? Is there a hierarchy in which you can attempt to address it with that person? And if that is not successful, is there a chain, right? Can you start with the next person and see, is that going to jeopardize your job? Is that going to, right? There's so many considerations. We've also talked about should I get the fuck out of Dodge, right? Extreme situations. Yes, I'm giving you permission. You can leave that job, right? Obviously.
And the market is great for you right now because everybody's hiring. The world is short-staffed.
The world is short-staffed. So true. Again, I don't think this episode is going to be I listened to it and now I know how to handle it, right? I think we're putting it into people's awareness because let's start these conversations. If we don't start these conversations, nothing's going to change.
And I think it's more about being able to recognize potential signs and reminding yourself that you have value and your voice has value. And that if you are in a place that you can safely assert yourself and communicate clearly, those are some skills that can help you navigate through some of these toxic relationships, especially implementing boundaries. What's okay with me? What's not okay with me? These are the non-negotiables. And I think in the work setting, Nikki's right. If I'm on probation, do I want to be that employee that says this isn't going to work for me? Well, you have to decide. You have to decide, is this work environment for you?
And I think I want to hold off on this, but we're going to wrap back around to boundaries because boundaries is where it's all at when it comes to relationships and toxicity or unhealthiness. So remind me, we're going to hit back on that, Alyssa. But I want to shift focus really quick. So we've talked about romantic relationships, colleagues or work relationships. I want to talk about family because I think that as a society, we are more primed to be able to recognize a toxic relationship when it is a friend, colleague, coworker, and not a family member, right? Because there are so many messages that we get from the time we come out of the womb that blood is thicker than water. They're, what are all those phrases that people use to just rate my family
is forever.
Exactly. Right. We're ingrained and just inundated with these messages. And if that works for you, awesome. Right. If you have a healthy family, a healthy relationships in your family, you feel valued and supported. Excellent. Cool. Awesome. But with these messages that we get, okay, here's a question. You have a child. Would you teach them that whoever they go and sit next to in first grade or kindergarten, when they go to school for the first time, that the 6 people that sit around them, those are going to be your people for the rest of your life, and you are going to be there for them no matter what, and you're going to just, no matter who they are, no matter what kind of person they are, those are going to be your people. You got to be there for them no matter what. No, we teach our kindergartner they're a little young at that age, but when they go to school, we start teaching them to make healthy friend choices. We start teaching them how to observe their peers' behaviors and decide who they want, what kind of people they want in their life, who they want to be. Right. But for some reason, we teach kids and adults that they're your family, and that's what matters. It doesn't matter what kind of person they are. It doesn't matter how they treat you. They're your family. They're your person. You got to take care of them. Right. So I think my mind just gets blown by this total discrepancy in terms of we take away autonomy when it comes to family relationships, but we teach it in other relationships. Right. So for those reasons, I think it's a lot harder for just, anybody in society to recognize when those toxic relationships are occurring within the context of family.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, man, we could, if this was a radio show, we'd have callers call in and
right?
disputing this. And I would be I'd be so open to hearing this debate because It is so embedded in us that these are the boundaries and the expectations that you have in all relationships, but your family. There's non-negotiables in the family of you're always going to be there because family's forever. And I do understand that family some people, first. Family means biology. For some people, family means extended family or friends. And I think that's fair. I think that's actually very healthy to recognize what constitutes Absolutely. Family and totally. How they fall into that with you. I think I'm going to speak more on the biology piece.
Yes. And I should have clarified. That's what I meant. I meant that the family that you were born into or the family that you're raised with.
You don't get a choice of who your family is, right? Despite whether that family member has codependent behaviors, is emotionally sucking you dry, or is financially sucking you dry because they're always broke and they need money and they need to borrow money, or whatever it may be. And for me, we work with a lot of sexual abuse in our practice, and I won't go too much into this, but it's also difficult for children and minors who are told, respect your elders. Yet sexual abuse is very prominent in these internal family systems, right? Whether it is the immediate family members or extended family members. So when we're talking about, again, that would be the extreme, guys. I'm going to go back to toxic, unhealthy relationships. But when we talk about toxicity in family systems, it is the research, our professional experience tells us that it can be very present in family systems. So we just want to remind you that there is this potential perspective that you have the ability to implement boundaries and create distance between you and family members who are unhealthy for you and your life and or your children. And for some people, so difficult, right?
That was my mind exploding.
No. And you know what? If you guys are feeling passionate about this topic and you're like, no, that's not how it is. This is actually how it is. I do want to hear from you. So y'all can message us.
I think this would be a hot topic.
I think it would too. And I actually want to go more. I might want to go into this with some other interviewees. So we'll keep that in mind. But back to toxicity. So we've covered potential signs of toxic relationships and romantic relationships in your social relationships, in family relationships, and work relationships. So unfortunately, these toxic behaviors have the ability to show up in all different avenues of your life.
If there's a human involved, the potential is there.
The potential is there, right? But that's why we have all these great coping skills and communication skills. And I'm throwing out all these therapy words now. But you guys have value. If you're listening to this, your voice matters, your feelings matter, your needs matter. What you choose to do with those, is up to you. And if you need any help with that, you are welcome to access therapy services in your area or within your state. Or you can call Nikki and I.
Hey, your O'Leary voice just came back.
I haven't had my O'Leary voice in a while. This is my sick O'Leary voice.
Yes, absolutely. And, are there times when therapy or counseling support becomes crucial to navigating this process? Absolutely. But I also want to touch on something that Alyssa had shared in the beginning. It's often easier to recognize these relationships when you're not the one in it. Mm-hmm. So do you have a friend or family member that you trust? Do you have somebody where you trust their observations, you trust their judgment, you trust their morals and their ethics? Can you talk with them and say, hey, I heard this podcast, Therapists Uncut, and it got me thinking about my relationship with Joe Schmo. And what do you think? Do you see any, right? Can you seek that outside feedback? And sometimes that's enough. But I know we got to wrap up here shortly, but boundaries is where it's at. So if you recognize any degree of unhealthy dynamics or toxicity within a relationship, it's all about boundaries. Now, the cool thing is that's another spectrum, right? So for one relationship, you might be able to set some fairly small, minor boundaries, and that is enough to restore it to a healthy degree for you where you can have a healthy relationship with that person. All the way up to there are going to be times where it's either unsafe to do so or you attempt to get to a healthy place within that relationship and the other person is just non-responsive because relationships are two humans and humans are obviously, we kind of suck sometimes. Sorry, that was very judgmental. We are not always able to respond.
We're not always at our best.
There we go. But there's going to be times when the boundary that you set is going to be, I can no longer partake in this relationship. Right. And then there's everything in the middle. Mm-hmm. If we think about family, I would love to spend time with my family as a whole on holidays, on birthday, whatever it is, but I'm, maybe not going to engage in phone calls weekly with this person, or, maybe I know that they tend to be more toxic for me in regards to certain topics, right? When they start talking about, okay, this is not going to be a hot topic for the last couple of years, right? When they start talking about healthcare or politics, I know that I cannot engage in that topic of conversation with this person. So I'm going to set this boundary with you. Hey, you know what? I really appreciate you as a person in my life. I've noticed that this conversation really, it doesn't tend to lead in a positive direction for us. We don't tend to be able to hear each other very well. So I'm just going to say, hey, I'm hoping that you can respect this. This is just something I can't talk with you about. I'd love to continue our relationship in every other facet. And I'm just hoping that you can understand where I'm coming from on this and then continue on and have a fantastic relationship with that person. It's a spectrum. It's a total spectrum.
And spoiler alert, guys, the skills and the tools that we talk about, they are hard. They're not going to be easy, but they are available to you. As always, thank you for joining us today on the Therapists Uncut podcast. My name is Alyssa Nahara, licensed clinical social worker, and I'm here with my co-host, Nikki Young, licensed marriage and family therapist, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for helping us make mental health relatable and a part of your everyday conversation. If you found this podcast helpful, we would love if you shared it with your friends or family, and we'd love if you follow us on social media and subscribe. We'll see you next time.
Peace.
I'm still waving. I can't stop waving.
Thank you for joining Therapists Uncut, a production of AMP Smart Business. To learn more about Therapists Uncut and stay up on upcoming episodes, please subscribe and follow us on social media. As a reminder, although the Therapists Uncut co-hosts are licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling. If you need professional therapy, please contact your local provider or primary care provider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Therapists Uncut.